Good afternoon, everyone. I am Dr. Houting. I'm an Autism CRC researcher. My role is a postdoctoral research associate at Macquarie University in Sydney. And as well as being a researcher, I am also heavily involved in autism advocacy. I'm a participant in the Sylvia Rodger Academy's governance program, and I'm the host for today's webinar, which is the first in our Autism Month webinar series. We'll be holding 4 webinars this Autism Month to improve understanding about autism and to share some of the Autism CRC's latest research and outcomes across our 3 research programs, which are early years, school years, and adulthood. So tomorrow we have our early years webinar, which is on diagnosis, early intervention, and sleep. And on Thursday, we will have 2 webinars. One will be on connection and quality of life for autistic adults, and the other will be on building resilience in children and teenagers. In today's webinar, you will have a chance to hear the perspectives of 4 autistic leaders who have been involved in the Autism CRC in a variety of ways, working to influence change. Before we get started, there are a couple of housekeeping things that I want to cover. So firstly, to let you know that you do have the opportunity to submit questions to our panelists, and you can do that by typing your questions into the Q&A pane of the Zoom control panel. So if you look down at the bottom of your screen, you will see the Q&A pane. It has 2 little speech bubbles as the icon. If you do have questions, please use that Q&A pane to submit them rather than using the chat panel, and that way we will definitely see them. You can send your questions at any time during our webinar today, and we will go through and collect those questions, and we will address as many of them as we can during the Q&A session, which will happen at the end of today's webinar. Also up at the top right of your Zoom window, you should be able to toggle between what's called speaker view and gallery view. So in speaker view, you will see a large image of whoever is speaking at the time. And in gallery view, you will see a smaller image of everybody who's in the webinar. Our recommendation is to use speaker view to view the webinar. So let's get started. On to today's topic. The Sylvia Rodger Academy, which is an initiative of the Autism CRC, delivers nationwide programs aimed at empowering autistic adults. Its mission is to provide programs, pathways, and networks that create communities where autistic people fully contribute and influence policy, practice, and culture in partnership with our peers. All of our panelists today have been involved in 1 or more Sylvia Rodger Academy programs, either as a participant, a staff member, or as part of a project team. They're here today to share their insights about collaborating effectively with autistic people, influencing positive change in their community or area of interest, and finding opportunities to collaborate and create or be part of change. So without further ado, I would like to introduce the 4 autistic leaders on our panel: Ashton Bartz, Geraldine Robertson, James Cifuentes, and Trudi-Anne Gribble. And I'll let each one of them introduce themselves a little bit more. So Ashton, if you'd like to introduce yourself.
Yeah, no worries. Hello everyone, my name's Ashton. I use they, them pronouns, and I am currently based in Brisbane in Queensland at Autism CRC headquarters. I currently work for the Sylvia Rodger Academy initiative as a project officer. So last year I ran the governance program. This year I'll be running the upcoming research program. In general, so to give you an idea of some of my background and interests, I am passionate about LGBTIQA+ advocacy, autistic advocacy, and improving mental and sexual health outcomes for the general population. And I also really love the arts. And then my work history is predominantly as a youth worker for a variety of local councils and the Youth Affairs Council of WA. And then lastly, in a more volunteer capacity, I've been a part of a few different focus groups and reference groups as well, the most recent being the National LGBTI Health Alliance's Disability and LGBTIQA+ Employment Initiative. And that is a very quick rundown of me. So over to the next.
Awesome. Thanks, Ashton. Geraldine, would you like to give us a quick introduction?
Hi, everybody. I'll jump right in. I was diagnosed in about 2000, which is quite a while ago, but very late in my life. And I was a teacher at the time, about to leave teaching because it was just too hard. But diagnosis made a difference, made it possible for me to stay. I started advocacy not long after my diagnosis, and I found that it helped me a lot to talking to different people to understand myself and to come to terms with autism, because at the time, all the information about autism was from the medical model, and it was really negative. And most autistics I met at the time had a lot of self-hatred. So also I found that we had no say in what happened to us or anything about us at all, and I had to change that. So that's been my passion and interest for some years now. Keeps going. Okay, thanks.
Awesome. Thanks, Geraldine. And James, can you give us a quick intro?
Hi everyone, I'm James. I am a network manager for the ICANN network in southeast Queensland, and I spend most of my time, well, used to in days past, mentoring young autistic kids who we run little sessions and have a little powwow where we talk about autism, and but all from an autistic perspective. I've been doing that for a few years. My background is actually in entomology before I started doing this stuff. So it's been a big change for me moving into the advocacy world. And I am, of course, autistic myself. Yeah, that's my very quick background.
Great, thanks, James. And lastly, Trudi-Anne, can you give us a quick introduction?
Sure. Welcome everyone. Thanks for joining us today. My name's Gribble. I live in Western Australia and I'm an autistic individual who's very proud to work as the Operations Manager for Autism West, located in Fremantle. I'm also a director of our family company, an engineering firm that specialises in radiography and ultrasonics in the industrial field. And I'm currently an undergrad at Notre Dame University studying behavioural science. I'm married with 3 kids, all left home. My husband and I are an autistic couple, along with our youngest daughter. Thanks.
Great, thank you everyone. All right, so let's get started answering some of these questions and having a bit of a discussion. So the first question that I want to put to the panelists, and I'm going to go firstly to Geraldine with this one, is how do you find opportunities to collaborate and to create or to be part of change?
It's a really good question and easy to answer because the opportunities are everywhere. But for me, the most important things are that I'm a founding member of ASAN. That means I get a lot of issues coming up from personal experience of friends, and from members of the organisations I belong to. ASAN's particularly good because that gives me an opportunity to work with like-minded people. Chairing Autism Tasmania was an experience and a half, but it was fantastic because they actually wanted change, and it gave me an opportunity to work with an organisation from the inside, which I'd never had before. It had its own challenges, but it was really rewarding. People also approach me for individual advocacy because they've heard of something I've done, and I really like that. I find it emotionally very exhausting, but when I do it, it's very rewarding as well. And they approach on every possible issue from work, health, justice, which probably is the one I'm interested in, education, and I support people online through IEPs. So they're all really interesting. And right now I'm collaborating with the Tasmanian group that's trying to set up an organisation for people with disabilities and working across disability, because there's so little understanding of the synergy between autism and other conditions, particularly mental health. So pretty busy.
I can only imagine, Geraldine.
That's it.
And Trudy, did you want to give us some insights into how you find those opportunities?
Sure. First of all, I put my hand up to participate in collaboration, so I'm an active participant, and so other people know where I stand when it comes to collaboration and change. And it's evident to the community that I want to be part of change. So where do I find opportunities for collaboration? Same as Geraldine, everywhere I go. I look for opportunities in different clubs. I'm in different groups, other organisations, at uni, at work, and with other individuals. So out in the general community, invariably the topic comes up about where I work. So this is something I can talk about. If I'm comfortable enough to give out the information, I will. Occasionally this can open the window for others' opinions about autism, comments such as, oh, that's sad, or I feel sorry for people who suffer with autism, or we're all a bit autistic. And so that's my opening, to educate others how autistics view autism, that autistic people have specific unique strengths that are individual, that the community prefer to concentrate on strengths in order to encourage empowerment and self-determination, that we're as deserving as everyone else for recognition and for employment, and there's certain criteria to be met for diagnosis and so on. It's about education at every opportunity. So on a more collective scale, workplaces and organisations are always a good place to start to look at, to build a culture of change and collaboration. So I choose challenges I know that exist and I know others would like to make a contribution towards changing. Coming up with ideas and seeking voices to do this, ensuring to invite and engage people who have solution-oriented ideologies is vital. I look for ingredients I need to help with goals, for example, people who want to make the change and people that are willing to support and become part of a team. Everyone needs to be in the group to be willing to take a stand to get things off the ground and all be working towards a common goal. So looking for leaders to get the ideas off the ground and people who really believe in the cause.
Great, thanks so much for that, Trudy. So still on that idea of opportunities for collaboration, what kinds of opportunities do you find are the most engaging? What can call-outs do to really catch your attention and get you involved? James, is there anything that comes to mind?
Actually, very similar to the last part of what Trudy was saying. It's when you have a proposal or something that you sort of bring to me, having very clear outcomes and a notion of the problem that you're actually trying to solve. If it's a sort of vague thing about supporting and helping autistic people, then that's not really going to catch my eye. But if it targets a specific problem or a couple of specific problems and has a fairly clear outline, then that's really going to catch my eye. It also depends on at what stage it's at. If you've got a sort of something that you want my advice on, or if you think this is a good thing, then it doesn't have to be too detailed. But if you're actually looking for me to put time towards it, or to advocate maybe I can looking at that or something like that, then yeah, you need to have a bit of detail and a very clear set of outcomes that you want to achieve with that. So that would be my advice if someone's trying to catch my attention. Yeah.
Okay, great. And Ashton, did you have anything you wanted to say about that?
Yeah, I agree definitely in that with James in that I'm looking for people with a clear goal, depending on, of course, like what stage they're at. So the most recent experience that I was involved in, which was the National LGBTI Health Alliance Roundtable, they wanted to develop a toolkit for employers to help with employing LGBTIQA+ disabled people. And so that was like, oh, this is a clear goal. This is something that, you know, they know what they're working towards. And they were further along, obviously, in that process. The other thing, like, that I personally look for, which not everyone might, is that I do look for people who are interested in hearing from the demographics that I'm part of. So if someone says, you know, we are looking to highlight the voices of LGBTIQA+ people, or we're looking for more feedback from people with disabilities, that to me, while some people might go, oh, that feels a bit tokenistic, for me personally, it shows that they're going to be accommodating to my personal needs, and they're going to be open to have that discussion, which in the sense of, if we're talking about in call-outs, particularly if it's an unpaid opportunity, I'm like, well, I don't want to have to go in and explain everything 101. Like, I'd rather be able to come in and say, these are my needs, or, you know, this is, you know, my expectations, and be able to have that stuff met early on.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, those are sort of the two separate things that I personally look for. And I also follow organisations that I'm a fan of as well, to see what they're doing, and if, you know, there's any way that I can potentially sort of weasel in and start being involved with them and their work.
Awesome. There's some great tips there for any organisations out there who want to build up collaborations with autistic people. So the next question I have for our panel is, what are some practical tips that you can give to help make a collaboration successful? Geraldine, did you want to weigh in on this one?
Technical difficulties here. I've thought about this for a long time, and I think the most important thing is you have to work with a lot of people. Sometimes people you probably wouldn't even want to spend time with, but you just, to get anywhere, you have to work with them. So developing a mutual respect and finding common points when you differ greatly on many things is really important. Also, personally, I have to be very clear about communication challenges that I have, and I expect people to listen to me and to support me. Otherwise, I can't participate fully. And while I'm talking, you'll see that I have difficulties, and I don't try and mask them. I used to, and that just made it worse. So just owning who you are is really important. Talking about your challenge too, one of the things I don't do anymore is try and explain in a meeting situation or working with the public. I don't necessarily try and explain difficulties relating to autism, because then it diverts my purpose from what I want to achieve to educating about autism, and there's a place for both of them. So I'll talk about my difficulty, say, say in a room with lighting that's very difficult for me, I'll just say, do you mind if we turn off the lights and go and sit by a window? I have difficulty concentrating with fluorescent lights. And people listen to that. It's short, direct, and you move on with your core business. With complex meetings, I actually have to map conversations or I get lost. So I have different colours for different aspects of the conversation, and that helps me to keep track of who said what and have a good overview instead of hyper-focusing on a few specific areas of the conversation. And that's going to be different for different people. I also find that people like it when you know about them, and then when you go into advocacy, you often have to be able to make a very quick connection. So being able to say something personal to somebody you've never met before helps with that, because I often come across as cold and detached. So I have to find a way to do that really quickly. And yeah, they like, even though I've researched them on the internet, I don't say that, but they like that I know something about them. I know it sounds a bit creepy, but that's what I have to do. And also, while we're talking, I make a note of important things they've said, because you often have breaks. And this is the other thing about connecting with people again, to be able, you say that having a person's name and something important they said and bringing that up with them, they feel valued, and it helps build that connection again. So those are the things some of the things I do.
Great, thanks for that, Geraldine. James, did you have any tips that you might be able to add to that?
Covered a couple of more or less everything that I was going to say, but so good answer. But if I were to add to it, I'd say, as someone on that communication front who doesn't have too many communication needs, it's important to then make accommodations for people that do. Looking at meeting structures, checking in with people to make sure if they're keeping up with everything. This kind of meeting structure for some people is quite confronting and hard to keep up with, whereas for others, they just breeze through it. I find running online sessions very overwhelming. You wouldn't think it, but having 8 teenagers is a completely different experience emotionally than other adults. And despite the fact I can work with 100 people in a room where I'm with them online, that's a real struggle. So you wouldn't know that from watching it. So checking in with people during and after, seeing if there were any difficulties so that next time you can improve is really important. And the other one was that researching a topic that someone's interested in so you can come up with interesting questions. I first adopted that when I was working with kids, but it works so well with adults, particularly people on the spectrum, because they love to talk about it and you get new interests. And working with people with different strengths, particularly people who you can sometimes find frustrating, their different personality type is going to give them strengths that you don't have and that you perhaps don't recognise as being really important. So you become sort of force multipliers for each other. So yeah, looking for the different personality types is really, really important in collaboration.
Awesome. So the next question that I have for the panel here is still on that topic of collaboration, but specifically about when things aren't going so well. Do you have any suggestions for how to address those issues that come up when things aren't going very well in a collaboration? So if you're maybe having a disagreement within the team, or if you're struggling to meet deadlines. Ashton, did you want to take that one?
Yeah, I can definitely take that one. I think that it's important, well, first of all, it can depend a lot on what it is that isn't working well. There's definitely been times where I've been a member or a part of something where they've made a new goal or decided to do something that doesn't align with my own personal ethics or beliefs, in which case I've said, look, I'm sorry, that's not going to work for me. I'm going to need to move on from this, opportunity. In terms of things like, obviously in anything with a team, not everything will always go the way you want to, and that, maybe most people want to take a different direction. You're like, well, that's not what I would have liked to do. And I think in that case, it's really important to have a couple of things. One is, with any opportunity, I think it's really good to have something about the original goal or the original purpose of the group, and looking at that, say, a decision that was made, being like, well, while this isn't how I would have approached it, will this still get us to that goal? Like, is this something I'm still feeling comfortable with? And are we still, going to meet that target? The other side of it is discussing it outside of, if these decisions are being reached in a meeting or something like that. If you have something like a chair or some sort of leader who you can say, look, I need to, you know, talk this out a little bit more and find out why we've reached this decision, or I've got some concerns that I need to bring up one-on-one that maybe we can then look at addressing as a group. And then with something like a deadline not being met, obviously it's important to, like in that case, it's just important to know why, and also to understand that, you know, like I said before, like sometimes you might be involved in something that's an unpaid opportunity, and that's the same for everyone else. So a lot of people have, you know, jobs or families and other expectations. And so it can take, sometimes it might take you a little bit longer, and that can be really frustrating. But it's also, it is the reality of the world we live in. And so essentially, like for me personally, I just like to sort of work out, okay, like why has this happened? And then I can sort of get to a place where I can say, okay, you know, like a lot of people were really busy. This is going to take like an extra month. I'm okay with that because I understand why it's happened. Everyone's still passionate. Everyone's still, you know, on the same page, and we're going to, you know, get there. So I hope that helps. It was a little rambling.
No, absolutely. That was, yeah, very helpful, Ashton. Geraldine, did you want to weigh in on this idea of dealing with challenges when things aren't working?
A good answer, Ashton. Yeah, what am I going to say? For me, I talk about the things I have to do a lot. And one of the things I have to do when there are challenges is consciously put aside my ego, because I like to be right. And I have to keep reminding myself that sometimes I'm not. But also, when things go wrong, I tend to go into self-blame mode, and that's really destructive, and having to be really conscious of not blaming myself all the time. But I also find that if there are clear parameters, like Ashton said, you can always refer back to those and get the group to refocus on them and look at what you need to do to actually meet them, or is the suggestion going to meet them? I really like working with autistic groups. It's way easier because people say exactly what they mean. But sometimes there are other people in the group, or it might just be me and other people. And I struggle with people who are too polite and phrase things nicely, but because I only hear the surface message, not the message underneath. And so I have to constantly ask people for clarification, like, do you mean such and such, and use their words exactly and get them to tease out exactly what they were trying to say. And I have to keep, I say drilling down. I also have to really watch my body language, because I can be like a pit bull and really intimidate people. I know that. So I have, in a much more gentle sort of a way, but to drill down to get to the core of the issue. And often when you do that, you find that although there might be a conflict or a problem, people are talking about the same thing but using different language. So if you really keep clarifying until you all share understanding, that you're often, you know, on the same, in working towards the same goal in a very similar way. Sometimes it helps me when you're with somebody who's very dominant, and that I find that quite intimidating, but instead of asking a direct question, I will take another position. It's called the naive position, and saying, I don't understand such and such, and letting them explain again, but not challenging them. I need to be challenged, but if you're always on the offensive, it doesn't have a good working atmosphere. So another thing we do is with SAN, we work in pairs, or sometimes on a big task, threes, because as life gets in the way sometimes, and it's good to have a backup who can take over when you can't do something, or even in a meeting. If you're overwhelmed and need to move out, somebody else is there to take over. So that's a really good way to deal with issues as well. Me.
Great, thanks for that, Gerald. And we've got a comment from Kathy in the chat, just to let you know that you have never seemed the least bit pit bullish to her. So maybe that will help you feel a little bit more comfortable about your body language.
Autism groups.
So at this point, I'll just give a quick reminder to everyone who is watching and listening that if you do have questions for our presenters, you can send them through, type them into the Q&A pane down the bottom of your Zoom control panel, and we'll go through as many of those as we can at the end of the webinar. We've got a few questions coming through that I can see, which is awesome. So if you do have questions, feel free to send them through now. I've got just a couple more questions that I'm going to ask our presenters, and then we'll move on to questions from the audience. So the next thing that I would want to put to the panel is around the benefits and challenges of collaboration, and specifically, what do you think are some of the benefits and challenges of collaborating with autistic people, and is that different when everyone in the collaboration is autistic? Trudy, did you want to take a shot at this one?
Yeah, sure. First of all, I just want to say to Geraldine, I've been in one of your groups. Geraldine, you're awesome. We love you. So yes, there's definitely both strengths and challenges. There's no denying that. Strengths I'm beyond, so I'd like to start with that one. People who are autistic are unique and look at things differently. They have a different perspective than most and can think outside of the square. So this can be useful when you're trying to come up with ideas or are presented with a challenge. Non-judgmental listening. Usually they're not worried so much about you. They're ready and thinking about the problem and the answer. If they have extensive knowledge resulting from deep study or deep interest in topics that they're interested in. They can have logical thinking that's helpful in decision-making processes. Intensive focus, that's me, hyper-focus. So when they're working on a favourite activity or something they're really interested in, they can be details orientated and very dedicated to the job. They're often happy to do a repetitive job too that other people might find mundane. They have direct communication usually, they're good at maths, computer things, they're artistic. They're punctual and they're honest. Some of the challenges can be, it can be hard time, you can have a hard time motivating people sometimes if it's in an area that they may slightly not be that interested in. Difficulty focusing on something other than your interests, which goes along with what I've just said there. Getting the big picture can be a challenge because we tend to be focused on details. We can have an unbalanced set of skills as well. Sometimes the sensory and the overwhelming can turn into fatigue, so that can be a challenge as well as keeping things, you know, moderated so that people don't get fatigued. Can be difficult. Difficulty with generalising concepts, having trouble expressing feelings sometimes too, in a way that maybe other people can understand. Also some of the things are all participants feel more comfortable when they're working in an autistic space. So we call it autistic space. We did that at Future Leaders, and that was great because it generated and created a lot of, you know, comfort and ease and lessened anxiety quite a lot. Some of the challenging things can be difficult getting, you know, past some ideas. Sometimes we can get a bit stuck and fixated on things. Yeah.
Great, thanks for that. That's a great answer, Trudy. And James, did you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I think it's funny, when I'm in a situation where everyone is autistic, I often don't realise how well it's going till after the fact. One thing I've noticed is that when there's a round table the blocks of speech are larger. People might take 2 minutes, but everyone takes 2 minutes to answer something instead of the punctuations between people being much shorter. And when you have a mixed group of neurotypicals and autistics, that can be a bit disrupted. That's just something that I've noticed. The other thing I'd say, and that I've seen a lot of improvement in this in some of the younger people that I work with, is autistic people can be extremely apologetic when communicating, or they're couching everything they say with qualifications and, you know, let me know if I'm talking too long, or that sort of thing. And I guess that's just from having misunderstandings when they're younger, but they get more used to that the more and more they're around other autistic people and accepting spaces for autistic people. They become more clear. So that's the benefit of exposure to predominantly autistic spaces, I think, that I've seen, because I do work with a lot of quite young people, and I see that change in them. So yeah, that can be good bad at the start, but actually really good at the end of that process, where they learn their own communication styles, and being willing to ask for some adaptation in those communication styles. So yeah, it's different between the autistic youngers and elders, I'd say.
Yeah, definitely. And yeah, I think you're absolutely right about the benefit and the importance of having that space to develop your autistic identity. So I've got one more question for our panelists, and then I'm going to move on to some questions from the audience. The question that I would like to ask the panelists is, what opportunities and benefits do you hope that collaboration will make possible for the autistic community in the future? Ashton, do you want to have a go at that one?
Yeah, so I think one of the things that is really exciting at the moment, but is also really industry specific, is that in the field of IT, there's a lot more movement towards accommodating and employing people who are autistic, and that's something that I think, like, I'd really like to see that replicated across more industries. Farming and agriculture is another one where there's been some really good progress made. And I hope that would give autistic people more opportunities in the fields, in employment, and in being able to be employed in an area that they're really passionate about, but not experiencing things like, you know, continual burnout and struggling to, I guess, you know, struggling to, I guess for me, sorry, I'm having trouble forming my words at the moment. Sorry.
That's okay. I can.
Yeah, sorry, my brain kind of just stopped working, but yeah.
Maybe I'll jump over and see if Trudy wants to take a shot at this.
Thank you, Trudy. Sorry about that.
It's okay, Ashton. Look, many of our autistic communities are underemployed. This means if they're lucky enough to have a job, they can be struggling with jobs that are way under what they're qualified to do or specialised in doing. And that can bring many problems. They can end up doing a job that's not suitable for them, or in an area that is not of special interest to them, which can lead to failure at the job and general unhappiness, lack of self-esteem and job satisfaction, mental health disorders, depression and anxiety, being misunderstood or thought of as being a bad employee. So I'm hoping with collaboration that we can get out to employers out there to consider giving autistic employees some consideration, that perhaps we can get many autistic individuals employed and equally enjoying a healthy work life and job satisfaction that other people do. I think there needs to be a systematic shift in thinking to achieve this, so it appears slowly and with more organisations promoting autistic strengths, that employers are more and more starting to come around to the idea and implement some changes, but we've still got a long way to go. I'm hoping that people change having those low expectations that their kids will never work, and change the focus from what they can't do to what they can do, and maybe focus and build on those strengths and abilities, and let's work with those. It's somewhere to start. The hope is in turn all of this will result in individuals improve self-esteem, self-determination skills, a can-do attitude, and the expectation that they can get a career and they'll be happy and live a fulfilling life, which in turn will help with mental health, sense of achievement, sets an example also to inspire other autistics to follow, and creates more financial independence and self-determination generally in life.
That was such a beautiful answer, Trudy. Thank you.
Did you want to add anything, Ashton, or do you think Trudy sort of covered everything?
Yeah, I think Trudy really nailed it. So I'm happy with that.
No problem. Well, we've got some great questions coming in from our audience. So I might move on and put a few of these questions to our panelists if everybody is comfortable with that. And we'll see how we go. So I've got a question that's come in here from Pia, and the question is specifically focused on research, but I think it's probably something that we can that applies to advocacy more generally and working with organisations more generally. And Pia is talking about situations where researchers or other organisations have autistic people as part of the team, but are not really engaging authentically and transparently with those autistic people. So her question is, what can we do when we're approached by researchers or by organisations to make sure that we're not just being used as the token autistic? Maybe Ashton, do you have an idea on that one, working for the Autism CRC?
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting question because well, for me personally, I don't have a research background, but I have participated in research, and I've definitely experienced the thing where, you know, you don't know why you're being asked the questions you're being asked, or they're not being really clear about how much time they require from you, things like that. I think that there isn't necessarily if you're being approached by researchers, there are definitely things you can look for in terms of how they phrase this or how they talk about that approach. So if they're talking about, you know, well, we want to actually, you know, have like an equal partnership with autistic people, we want to collaborate, and we want, you know, that involvement. But like looking at how they phrase it and how that sits with you, like what they're asking, you think, well, is that, you know, am I comfortable with that? Because it's the program I'm running at the moment, if they participated in the Autism CRC's research program, that's a good indication that they're going to be more interested in actually including you as an equal. And it's important because obviously a lot of that time, like not a lot of time, but sometimes, like, again, those opportunities might be unpaid as well. And so you should feel like well within your rights to essentially ask as many questions of them as you need to feel comfortable to participate, because your time is valuable, and you know, you as a person, you're valuable as well. So if anything is unclear or doesn't sit right, that isn't something you should take on as a failure on your own part. They need to be clear about, what they're looking for, and that's my 2 cents as well as a non-researcher.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Ashton. Yeah, and I think Trudy, you wanted to chime in on this?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of really important things that I was hearing from that question. And one thing is that people often don't feel included that are on the spectrum. And I think make sure the people that you're going to work for understand you and your needs and what you need. You need to be, this is hard for autistics, but you need to be, to ask people and let people know what is needed to accommodate you. It could be environmental. Could be anything, but just make sure they know what you need, and maybe suggest they do, or ask them if they do, like a universal design of learning. So that's finding out exactly what you need to be successful at your job. And I think half of the reasons that we do get left out is that people probably don't know how to approach us, or think they're going to upset us, or just don't understand us.
One last thing as well I wanted to just quickly add is that if at any time you become uncomfortable or it doesn't feel like what's happening, is sitting comfortably with you, you can always drop out of research. Like, you can always say, look, I don't want to be a part of this study anymore. So like, that's okay. If it's something where it's just really not working for you, like never feel like you're obligated to see it all the way through if you're being made to feel uncomfortable, or like they're not listening to you or treating you as a token. So don't feel like you have to see it through at all.
Yeah, great. Thanks everyone for all those comments. And I think I think it is definitely something that we need to work on and we need to move forward from, is this idea of having the token autistic. It's definitely something that there's been a lot of progress on in the last few years. But I think there's definitely still some room for improvement in terms of having us involved in things in more meaningful ways. And hopefully we'll see that shift in the future. There's some really great questions coming through here. So I'm just, there's one here that I wanted to put to the group. This one is from an anonymous person in our audience. And their question is that there are a lot of really well-intentioned allistic or non-autistic parents who are interested in influencing positive change about autism, especially around issues of acceptance and understanding. What can aspiring allies do to make sure that they are being effective and respectful in their efforts? I wonder if Geraldine, you might have some ideas on that. And you're going to need to unplug your headphones for us, Geraldine, so we can hear you. Oh, we've still got you on mute.
Because when people
don't
understand our perspective, they often say things that fire you up so fast. So holding on and being very patient and understanding that people might only take on one idea at a time, and sort of prioritising all the things they come to you with, and just dealing with one thing at a time is important. And acknowledging that it's hard to understand a perspective from another person's point of view, just like it's hard for me sometimes to understand their points of view. And people need time to explore new ideas, so they might initially say no, or argue. But it takes some time, and it's all people do this. It takes some time to kind of come to terms with something that might be completely against conscience, and accepting that people are putting an effort in is really important too. But also talking to them about the benefit of them and their children knowing autistic adults, so that they get a bit of an immersion in different perspectives. And their children do too, because that's one of the most important things.
Yeah, absolutely, Geraldine. Did anyone else want to add any suggestions? Yeah, James, things that allies can do to be supportive?
I think that one of the things that allies can do to be supportive is to recognise their own journey a little bit in terms of their understanding. I think just in a very vague trend, I've seen some allies can be a little bit, as Geraldine put earlier, pit bullish. They can be very, very strident, and they don't get to see our perspective of all the little innocent misunderstandings. They can sometimes see things that were just an innocent misunderstanding as an attack of their autistic relatives, friends, things like that, and they can come on it a bit strong, and way stronger than I think most autistic people would. I don't know, they can kind of just be a little bit overly aggressive in some ways. Sometimes that's needed, but it's just something that I've noticed. Sometimes they need to recognise what a learning curve their relationship with the autistic person has been, and give some other people who either didn't know or didn't know they knew autistic people just a wee bit more slack.
Okay. Great, really interesting insight, James. I guess from me as well to weigh in on that question, I think one key thing that allies can do that's really helpful is to signal boost autistic voices. As an ally, your job is to be there to support the autistic community. And the best way to do that is to share the messages that actual autistic people are trying to get out there. Occasionally allies can unintentionally end up speaking over the people that they're trying to support, and unintentionally. But yeah, so just ensuring that you're always boosting the voices of the people you're trying to support, I think, is a really important one. We've got a couple of questions coming through around schools. So I might aim some of these towards you, James, because that's sort of your area of expertise.
Oh no.
So a couple of general ones around helping autistic students with coping, and advice for people working in sort of support roles in schools, how to work effectively with autistic students. I wonder if you've got maybe one or two just key tips for people in terms of how to work really effectively with autistic students, and in particular, if students are having trouble coping.
My one piece of advice particularly would be to be very flexible around communication styles. A lot of people, they have the blanket thing, or autistic people don't like making eye contact, so all this whole thing about being on screens in a way must be super great for them. That's not necessarily the case. Like I said, I thrive on human-to-human contact, and screens, and that can be somewhat overwhelming for me. So making sure that you try everything, and recognizing the lag that's going to exist in finding a new routine, and how important that routine to not exist. I love that I'm working when I can now, and just, doing bits and bobs all over the shop, but that lack of routine can be so disruptive. And the fact that all the days blend into one, it's anathema to being able to concentrate on one thing in a lot of cases. So recognizing that, and that, isolation can be really, really tough for people who, even if they don't like a lot of human contact all the time, have actually come to rely on that routine of going to school and that sort of thing. So just be patient, and recognize that people are going to need to take breaks. If you're running an online session and someone drops out, probably a very good reason. It's a troubling time for people who have, for everybody, but particularly for people who have delayed processing and all different sorts of things like that.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a really tough time for everybody at the moment. I wonder, Geraldine, if you've got anything to add on this. I know you've got a background in education? Can't hear you.
She's muted.
Good points, James. I think the special interest for those people who have them, I think you can't underestimate the importance of that for learning, for de-stressing, for connecting with each other, if you want to develop an understanding of a person's communication style, the best way to do it is to talk to them about their personal interest, because they're so much more open. So that's what I would really emphasise.
Great, thanks for that, Geraldine. So we're getting close to the end of time, but there's we might have time for one or two more questions. So we have a question here from someone who is interested in joining an organisation to help with sort of supporting, motivating, and motivating somebody who is autistic, and looking for specific organisations. I'm wondering if anyone on the panel has any specific organisations that they'd like to recommend that are autism specific organisations. I know a few of us have connections with particular organisations. Maybe now's a good time to put in a plug for some of your organisations. James, you're coming to mind?
Well, yeah, you know, we're running heaps and heaps of online mentoring programs for young people. It can be a great way to connect. You know, just having that thing we talked about earlier, that autistic space, even if it's in their bedroom through a screen for an hour with a bunch of other autistic people, it can be hugely beneficial. So that's my little plug for the ICANN online mentoring. Yeah, a little bit of shameless self-advocacy. There we go.
And James, I know are based primarily in Victoria, but are your online sessions national now? Or?
Oh, yes, national, yeah. So I've got several people in Queensland who do online mentoring. But I've run online mentoring sessions with a mentee in pretty much every state at the same time. Have people in Victoria, all the way up in the NT in Queensland, and you know, you get 2 or 3 sessions into a program, and then you're like, oh, you're in the NT. It's sort of like you don't even realise how far away you are. So yeah, that's been the real benefit of the online mentoring, is being able to reach out to people where we can't reach them physically yet. So yes, everywhere in Australia.
Great.
And Trudi, I think you wanted to add something there?
Yeah, so just a bit of a plug for Autism West there. We're doing online groups as well, and we have ages ranging from 10 right through to 18 plus, so you can be 50 and join one of our social support groups. We're having those online at the moment. We're looking at extending that to regional. Well, we've extended that to regional WA now, and I guess there's no harm if we've got the capability to manage more being nationally. So just keep that in mind as well. Yeah.
Great. Thank you so much, everyone. So we've still got some great questions coming in, but unfortunately we are out of time, so I'm going to have to wrap it up there. Apologies to the attendees if we didn't get to your question today, but I'm sure you're welcome to send things through to the Autism CRC, and they will be able to give some advice if it's needed. So I want to thank our panelists again today. Thanks to Ashton, to Geraldine, James and Trudi for taking the time out of your day to do this webinar with us and for sharing your experiences and your knowledge with us. I would like to thank all of our viewers today as well for joining us. I hope that you found the webinar informative and insightful. I definitely found it really interesting to listen to our panelists share their experiences. This year's webinar series with the Autism CRC has been very, very popular. There have been over 1,000 registrations across the 4 sessions already. If anyone who's watching would like to be able to share today's webinar, there will be a recording of this session put up on the Autism CRC YouTube channel, so you'll be able to access it there. And Autism CRC will be sharing the recording on our website and through social media on Facebook and Twitter. That will most likely happen in the next week or 2, so you'll be able to access the recording there. And if you'd like to know more about Autism CRC's work in research across the lifespan, please do visit the Autism CRC website. You can sign up there for the Autism CRC e-news. You'll get a regular newsletter in your inbox, which is really helpful. And you also have the opportunity to participate in some of the research studies that Autism CRC is running. And of course, you can also follow us on social media, on Facebook and on Twitter, to keep up with everything that we're doing there. So I will call the webinar to a close. Thank you again to all of our panelists and all of our attendees for joining us today. And I hope you enjoy the rest of your day and have a lovely day. See you later.